The Eagles have made another defensive move, and this one might quietly end up being one of the most important hires of the offseason. According to reports, Philadelphia is set to bring in Mike Pellegrino from Buffalo, adding a coach with more than a decade of NFL experience and a resume that deserves real attention. And before anyone panics about previous reports regarding Joe Casper's promotion, that situation appears to have simply been a matter of wording confusion. Casper still holds his role, and Pellegrino joins the staff as an addition, not a replacement. That matters because what the Eagles are building in the secondary right now is not just about filling a position. It's about strengthening a unit that could define the next phase of this defense. Pellegrino may only be 32 years old, but he has been coaching in the NFL since 2015. He spent several seasons in New England, first as a coaching assistant and then as a quarterbacks coach before moving on to Buffalo. During his time with the Patriots, he was part of 2 Super Bowl winning staffs under Bill Belichick. That alone speaks volumes about the environment he developed in, but what really stands out is the player development track record. He coached Stephon Gilmore during his 2019 Defensive Player of the Year campaign. He helped develop J.C. Jackson from an undrafted free agent into an All-Pro in 2021, with Jackson recording 22 interceptions between 2019 and 2021, one of the highest totals in the league over that span. Christian Gonzalez also earned second-team All-Pro recognition under that umbrella, and players like Jason McCourty, Jonathan Jones, Marcus Jones, and Jack Jones were part of that developmental pipeline as well. That kind of resume matters in Philadelphia, especially when you consider how much this organization values maximizing draft capital and developing talent. The Eagles are not just trying to get production from first-round picks, they want coaches who can elevate late-round selections and undrafted players into legitimate contributors. Pellegrino has done exactly that before. It does not mean he is walking in with a magic wand to instantly fix every depth concern in the secondary, but it does suggest the Eagles are serious about maintaining a high standard of development behind their top names. While we're on the defensive side of the ball, the Max Crosby conversation refuses to go away. There are league voices suggesting that if Crosby becomes available, the Eagles would be among the top contenders. The idea of pairing Crosby with Yolan Carter on the same defensive line is undeniably exciting. Crosby produced 73 tackles, 28 tackles for loss, 10 sacks, 6 pass breakups, and an interception in 15 games last season. Over 7 years in the league, he has averaged nearly 10 sacks per season, often while facing consistent double teams. He turns 29 in August, but there has been no clear sign of decline. The problem is cost. The rumored asking price mirrors what it took to acquire Micah Parsons in that reported framework involving Kenny Clark and multiple first-round picks. If you start talking about giving up multiple firsts and additional players while also absorbing a major contract, you are reshaping the roster in a significant way. Howie Roseman has never been afraid to be aggressive if he believes the value is right. But there is a tipping point where the long-term implications begin to outweigh the immediate impact. The Eagles have young defensive stars who will need extensions in the coming years. Committing massive money to Crosby affects those future decisions. That does not eliminate the possibility, but it makes the math complicated. At the same time, another storyline gaining traction involves the quarterback position. ESPN's Jeremy Fowler mentioned the idea of Philadelphia drafting a quarterback on day 2. That headline can easily be misinterpreted as pressure on Jalen Hurts, but context matters. Tanner McKee is entering the final year of his contract. If the Eagles believe they can extract trade value for him this offseason, drafting a quarterback could provide flexibility. McKee's stock took a hit after his Week 18 performance, but if a team values him as a developmental option, even a 4th-round pick would represent a return on a 6th-round investment. That is the type of calculation Roseman often makes. It is less about replacing Hurts and more about managing assets intelligently. And then there is the offensive side discussion surrounding Romeo Doubs. Some analysts believe the Eagles could target him in free agency. At 26 years old and coming off one of his better seasons, Doubs would fit as either a complementary piece alongside A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith, or as insurance, depending on how future contract conversations unfold. Financially, it would not be simple, especially if Braun remains on the roster. But the familiarity with offensive concepts and coaching connections makes the idea intriguing. So here we are. A promising young defensive coach joins the staff with a track record of developing highly valued talent. Trade speculation swirls around one of the league's premier edge rushers. Quarterback asset management becomes a subtle but real conversation, and free agency presents options that could reshape the supporting cast on offense. The Eagles are not sitting still, and every move feels interconnected. If you step back and look at the bigger picture, which of these storylines matters most to you right now? The development boost in the secondary with Mike Pellegrino, the aggressive possibility of pursuing Max Crosby, or the strategic quarterback decisions involving Tanner McKee and the draft? If you look at how all of this connects, it really starts to feel like this offseason is less about one blockbuster move and more about calculated positioning. The Eagles are standing at a crossroads where development, cap management, and long-term roster construction all intersect at the same time. And that is why every rumor feels heavier than usual. Let's go back to the Max Crosby discussion for a moment, because this is where emotions can take over. On the surface, adding a two-time All-Pro edge rusher who consistently produces double-digit sack numbers feels like a no. You imagine third downs at Lincoln Financial Field in December, the crowd roaring, Crosby lined up opposite Jalen Carter, collapsing the pocket. It is easy to fall in love with that image. Crosby himself has openly talked about what it feels like to play in Philadelphia late in the season, describing it as the kind of environment you dream about as a kid if you truly love football. That kind of mentality aligns perfectly with what this city embraces. But here is the reality. Reportedly, the price could resemble a massive multi-first-round package similar to the one that was floated in the Micah Parsons scenario. And when you begin attaching young players to those picks, that is when it becomes difficult to justify. You are not just talking about draft capital, you are potentially talking about losing cost-controlled contributors while simultaneously adding a player with a contract north of $30 million per year. The Eagles have already invested heavily on offense. They have young defensive players approaching extension windows. Every dollar and every pick carries weight. And that brings up something else that cannot be ignored. Timing. The legal tampering period begins in early March, and free agency quickly follows. If Philadelphia is seriously considering a pursuit of Crosby, that decision would almost certainly need to align with what they plan to do at edge rusher in free agency. You cannot afford to miss out on one path while gambling on another that may never materialize. There is no safety net in that scenario. So whatever conversations are happening behind closed doors, at the combine, or through back-channel discussions, they are happening with urgency. Now shift back to the quarterback conversation, because this one deserves a calmer, more analytical lens. Jeremy Fowler's mention of drafting a quarterback early sparked reactions. But when you examine it closely, it sounds far more like asset management than panic. Jalen Hurts has proven he can win. Teammates have publicly defended his leadership. Narratives about chemistry based on isolated party photos or sideline body language do not override his track record as a competitor. The real variable is Tanner McKee. He was drafted in the 6th round in 2023 and has served as the primary backup. 1 year ago, some fans believed he could command second-round value in a trade. After an uneven showing in Week 18, that projection cooled. But even if the Eagles could extract a 4th-round pick, that would still represent positive value, especially in a quarterback landscape that is not loaded with elite prospects. A team could talk itself into McKee as a developmental option. If Philadelphia drafts a quarterback on day 2 or day 3, that move may simply be about maintaining depth while turning one asset into another. This is how Howie Roseman operates. He evaluates not just the player, but the investment relative to draft position. If you draft someone in the 6th round and get 2 years of backup value plus a mid-round pick in return, that is efficient management. It does not have to be emotional, it has to be strategic. Then there is the ripple effect on the rest of the roster. If you pursue Crosby, do you alter your extension priorities? If you move McKee, do you invest those resources into skill positions? The mention of Romeo Dew as a potential free agent target highlights how interconnected these decisions are. Dew, still only 26, could thrive in a system that spreads the ball and leverages multiple receivers. But his projected price range is not insignificant. If A.J. Brown remains and DeVonta Smith continues to command targets, adding another notable contract at wide receiver tightens the financial picture even more. All of this unfolds while the Eagles quietly reinforce their coaching infrastructure. Mike Pellegrino's arrival is not flashy, but it reflects a commitment to sustained player development. His background under Bill Belichick and his work with players like Stephon Gilmore and J.C. Jackson demonstrate an ability to elevate talent across different draft profiles. That matters when you are building a defense designed to stay competitive year after year rather than chasing one short window. So as we move deeper into this offseason, the real question may not be whether the Eagles make a headline move, it may be whether they choose precision over splash. Do they double down on internal growth and cap flexibility, or do they push chips toward the center of the table for a player like Max Crosby, fully aware of the long-term implications? This is where I want to hear from you. If you had to choose right now, would you prioritize maintaining draft capital and financial flexibility, or would you go all-in for a proven elite edge rusher and accept the consequences that come with it? And when you zoom out even further, This is what makes this particular offseason so fascinating. It is not just about adding talent, it is about defining identity. Are the Eagles positioning themselves for sustained flexibility over the next 3 to 4 years? Or are they preparing for a calculated strike that could dramatically reshape the present? Because here is something we have to acknowledge. The NFC landscape does not stand still. Every year, windows shift, teams reload, contracts expire, coaching staffs change. Philadelphia has built a reputation under Howie Roseman for staying ahead of those curves rather than reacting to them. That is why the Max Crosby discussion feels realistic instead of fantasy. If a player of that caliber becomes available, the Eagles are almost always in the conversation. Not because they recklessly chase headlines, but because they consistently explore every possible edge. But exploring is different from executing. If you trade multiple first-round picks and absorb a contract exceeding $30 million per season, you are effectively committing to a narrower margin for error elsewhere. Draft picks are not just players, they are affordable contributors who allow you to balance expensive stars. When those picks disappear, the pressure on each remaining selection intensifies, and then there is the philosophical angle. The Eagles have recently drafted well on defense, young players are emerging, extensions are looming. When you pay a premium veteran, you alter that timeline. You may accelerate your immediate ceiling, but you also compress your long-term breathing room. That is the trade-off. Now consider how that connects to the quarterback room. If Tanner McKee is moved for draft capital and a rookie quarterback is selected in the middle rounds, that is another example of maintaining sustainability. Quarterback depth matters. Philadelphia knows that better than most organizations, but so does financial efficiency. A day 2 or day 3 quarterback on a rookie contract provides low-cost insurance. It gives the front office and optionality is something this regime values highly. The same logic applies to potential skill position additions. Romeo Doubs represents a younger player with upside who could fit seamlessly if the financial structure works. But the Eagles would not make that decision in isolation. They would weigh it against future extensions, dead cap considerations, and positional priorities. Every dollar carries a chain reaction. Even the coaching addition of Mike Pellegrino fits into this broader pattern. It is not about one season. It is about development, continuity. A young coach with a proven track record of maximizing talent reinforces the idea that Philadelphia wants to cultivate internal growth as much as external acquisition. If your system consistently produces high-level contributors, you reduce the need to overspend in desperation. So here is where everything converges. Aggressive pursuit versus disciplined patience. Immediate impact versus structural longevity. Splash versus stability. The Eagles have the infrastructure to choose either path. The question is, which one aligns best with where this roster truly stands today? And as this unfolds over the coming weeks, speculation will intensify. Trade talks, contract rumors, draft projections, all of it will accelerate. But the core reality remains simple. Every decision must serve a cohesive vision, not just for September, but for seasons beyond. Because if we are being completely honest, this is where fan emotion and front office logic sometimes collide. As supporters, it is natural to crave the dramatic move, the headline, the trade that